Our witness of Scripture comes from 1 Peter 3:8 through 4:6. Finally, all of you have unity of spirit, sympathy, love for one another, a tender heart, and a humble mind. Do not repay evil for evil or abuse for abuse, but on the contrary, repay with a blessing. It is for this that you are called, that you might inherit a blessing. For those who desire to love life and to see good days, let them keep their tongues from evil and their lips from speaking deceit. Let them turn away from evil and do good. Let them seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayer. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. Now who will harm you if you are eager to do what is good? But even if you do suffer for doing what is right, you are blessed. Do not fear what they fear, and do not be intimidated, but in your hearts sanctify Christ as Lord. Always be ready to make your defense to anyone who demands from you an accounting for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect. Maintain a good conscience, sorry, I can never get that word right, so that, binoculars, yeah. So that when you are maligned, those who abuse you for your good conduct in Christ may be put to shame. For it is better to suffer for doing good, if suffering should be God's will, than to suffer for doing evil. For Christ also suffered for sins once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, in order to bring you to God. He was put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit, in which also he went and made a proclamation to the spirits in prison, who in former times did not obey when God waited patiently in the days of Noah, during the building of the ark, in which a few, that is, 8 lives, were saved through water. And baptism, which this prefigured, now saves you, not as a removal of dirt from the body, but as an appeal to God for a good conscience, through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God, with angels, authorities, and powers made subject to him. Since, therefore, Christ suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves also with the same intention, for whoever has suffered in the flesh has finished with sin, so as to live for the rest of your time in the flesh, no longer by human desires, but by the will of God. You have already spent enough time in doing what the Gentiles like to do, living in debauchery, passions, drunkenness, revels, carousing, and lawless idolatry. They are surprised that you no longer join them in the same excesses of dissipation, and so they blaspheme. But they will have to give an accounting to him who stands ready to judge the living and the dead. For this is the reason the gospel was proclaimed even to the dead, so that, though they had been judged in the flesh as everyone is judged, they might live in the spirit as God does. In Matthew 18:21-22, then Peter came and said to him, Lord, if my brother or sister sins against me, how often should I forgive? As many as 7 times? Jesus said to him, not 7 times, but I tell you, 77 times. You have heard the ancient texts.
Let's listen now to the word of God. If you're keeping track, this is week 6 in our study of 1 Peter. We started and we began to wonder, is Peter really brilliant and sneaky here? Peter, or someone writing in Peter's tradition, yeah? Is Peter intentionally suggesting we turn some of what he's saying upside down? You know, we read all that about the slaves being obedient to masters, wives being obedient to husbands, and we're thinking, but we found some clues, right? These clues that every now and then Peter is saying, don't listen to what it seems like I'm saying. Listen to the deeper truth. Now, the fun for me throughout this series has been seeing if that holds up, right? Because believe me, I don't have enough time to work out a series before I do it to see if it's going to be what I hope it will be. We start and then I'm discovering along with you if it works. So I'm here to tell you before we start today, through week 6 we're good. We've got 2 more weeks, I'm thinking. could still flip, but I have more confidence now. So, finally, we come to an initial conclusion. All of you have unity of spirit, sympathy, love for one another, a tender heart, and a humble mind. I can't tell you how much it pleases me that in conclusion, Peter does not call for unity of mind, but humility of mind. That's huge, especially within a tradition of faith that comes to insist too much on unity of mind over humility. That would make a good ending, but Peter goes on. It's the preacher in him. He feels the need to make yet another affirmation. Do not repay evil for evil or abuse for abuse, but on the contrary, repay it with a blessing. It's for this that you were called, that you might inherit a blessing. You hear the more explicit, you get what you give, yeah? Rather than what you try and impose. Which from a faith perspective, right, should inform more of our foreign policy, immigration policy, Department of Justice, our government, right? Instead of thinking, well, we have all the power, we're going to make you do this, what if it were more of a reciprocal, interactive relationship? The word translated blessing here, occurring twice, is literally in the Greek a good word, which transliterates from the Greek into the English as our word eulogy. Interesting, huh? So there's something, too, to be said for the idea of a legacy. Our inheritance is the return we get on what we invest in the world throughout our living. We're also reminded here, and reminded again in this conclusion, don't play by the rules of others. That bears repetition, Peter obviously thinks, because it's so hard in the moment. But do not allow someone else's behavior to dictate your own. To receive cruelty does not justify returning cruelty. As much as we might want to invert, I get back what I put out there, into you get back what you put out there, the former is commitment and the latter justification. Yeah? If I say I get back what I put out, that's my commitment. If I try and turn that around to you're going to get back what you put out, I'm justifying what I'm doing in response to, I'm pointing to Toby, but anyway. And that difference matters, justification versus commitment. Peter's initial conclusion to this epistle is the bold affirmation that accountability to what we say we believe is what matters, not judgment over what we think they should believe. For those who desire to love life and to see good days, let them keep their tongues from evil and their lips evil, and their lips from speaking deceit. Let them turn away from evil and do good. Let them seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayer, but the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. Straightforward affirmation here, but it's an interesting anthropomorphic image of God's face, which does not, notice, turn toward anyone or turn away from anyone. Did you notice? We either live in the way of God, facing forward in full view of God, or we're left in the wake of God, left behind, unseen, unheard. But that's not God's judgment. It's God's consistency to God's identity and the choices we make that determine our identity. Yeah? And that would make a good ending. But he goes on. Now, who will harm you if you are eager to do what is good? Seriously? Peter's acknowledging here, I think, the evil that others do. You can decide not to put cruelty out into the world, but that's no guarantee that others will too. Just because we adopt the way of God doesn't mean others will. But even if you do suffering for doing what is right, you're blessed. And we're repeating again. Peter's still not sure we've gotten it. And the word, are you ready? the word translated blessing here is not as right above good word, eulogy, but it's the word used in Jesus' Beatitudes. It's the Greek word makarios. I turn to my theological word book of the New Testament. Again, not normal practice for sermon writing these days, but it's the authority on Greek word usage. It was also written by a Nazi. It's one of those. It's a valuable resource, but not without naming the reprehensible that's attached to it. Right? I think that's kind of where I am. Miles Davis, right? We talked about this during that jazz series we did. Not a very good person. The way he treated his wife, women in his life, but the music. So maybe what we do is we say, great theological Greek study, horrible person. And both of those are true. Anyway, the oldest usages of this word go back to descriptions of the Greek gods, transcendently happy beyond all mortal cares. Yeah? Blessed, happy Mount Olympus. That's the original meaning of the word used in Jesus' Beatitudes. Jesus, who, though existing in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, assuming human likeness, and being found in the likeness of a human, humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. So, yes, do you see the pointedness of that word Jesus uses? In ancient Greek usage, though, so before Jesus, the word came to be applied. Who was it applied for first? The gods, transcendently happy. Can you guess who it came to be applied to next? The super rich, who, in the privilege of their wealth, lived above the cares of most of us. So what we call blessed, that originally meant of the gods, came to represent the 1%. And ever since, really, the 1% have both thought that they deserved blessing, and that blessing was nothing more than a recognition of their privilege couched in terms of what they earned and what they deserve. That's the context into which Jesus kind of explodes his Beatitudes. The wisdom of the Old Testament modified it a little bit, centering God as the author of blessing. So the Old Testament Beatitudes using this word, God is the source of blessing, but they're part of the wisdom tradition, so it's very much look, if you do what's good, what's right, what's the law, if you walk in the way of God, then you will be blessed, by which the wisdom tradition means you're going to be fine. You're going to have the money. You're going to roll in it. All good. 1%. Well, maybe the 15%. So there's a distinct prosperity angle to all that. Jesus, in the sacred paradox of his Beatitudes, put a reversal of circumstances more than a reversal of, backwards. Jesus put a reversal less of circumstance and more of perspective and values at the heart of the Beatitudes. Yeah? Jesus maybe is not so much saying, Kelly, blessed are the poor, for they shall inherit the kingdom. Maybe you're supposed to reevaluate what poor means instead of thinking, I'm a queen to be. Yeah? All right. Do not fear what they fear, and do not be intimidated. I love that Peter notes the fears of the 1%, of those choosing the illusion of their control rather than risking the love of God. It's always good, I think, to remember how afraid the 1% are, and to remember what they're afraid of. They're afraid of us. They're afraid of values and priorities other than theirs. Do not fear what they fear. Do not be intimidated, but in your hearts sanctify Christ as Lord. Always be ready to make your defense to anyone who demands from you an accounting for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. Oh, that would be a good ending. But Peter goes on. Maintain a good conscience so that when you're maligned, those who abuse you. Have you noticed every time he tries to end, he keeps going with, yeah, I know life kind of sucks. Because he knows he's got to deal with that, right? Because he knows life sometimes sucks. All right, so it's better to suffer for doing good, if suffering should be God's will, than to suffer for doing evil. For Christ also suffered for sins once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, in order to bring you to God. So he's still not sure we've gotten our responsibility to reverse evil. And again, he's linking such reversing to Jesus, who was put to death in the flesh but made alive in the spirit. You see what Peter just did there? That's not an affirmation of a bodily, physical resurrection, is it? Who was put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit. Now, mind you, this is the tradition of Peter, who was himself included in many of the gospel accounts of resurrection appearances. Alive in the Spirit, Jesus went, made proclamation to the spirits in prison, who in former times did not obey, when God waited patiently in the days of Noah during the building of the ark, in which a few, that is, 8 lives, were saved through water. Are you fascinated? That is absolutely fascinating. I'm going to tell you why, just in case you missed it and aren't just on the edge of your seat. You ready? The Roman customs agent that we've imagined proofing Peter's letter, yes, would not know this. But that's not the way the story of Noah goes. And we are supposed to know that. We are supposed to recognize that. How many of you noticed in the prelude that we started with the hymn, Morning Has Broken, but it changed to something in the middle? Did you notice? What did it change to? Let It Be. And then it changed back to Morning Has Broken. Right? Now you have to know the hymn and the song, right, to know that. So the custom agent, he gets to Noah. He doesn't care about Noah. He doesn't know Noah. Okay, here's some reference to some other story. Go back and read it if you doubt me. Pay close attention in, this would be Genesis 6 mainly. God sees evil. God determines to blot evil out. God names sorrow at having created. And God decides to bring an end to all flesh. Except for who? Noah, who is righteous. God judged the evil. God condemned it before the ark was ever built. That's what prompted the decision to have the ark built. There is not a time frame during the building of the ark where God's saying, okay, anyone want to change their mind? That's what Peter is saying, but that's not how the story went. It's not just a different way of interpreting the story. It flat out changes the story. I recognize the irony some of you might see in me saying this. But what are we inverting here? If we have been identifying clues that Peter gives us to say, okay, don't take this at face value. Here, he's quoting a story. Sorry, Scott. Here, he's quoting a story he knows we know, and he's quoting it wrong. Why? Hey, pay attention to this. What if he's reversing the very idea of judgment here? What if he's turning it into invitation? What if it's not God condemning that is the key here, but God consistently, persistently, God in love with us, always saying, I'm going this way. This is the good way to go. If you're back here, come on up. And baptism, which this prefigured, now saves you, which fits, right? Too, since baptism is not a judgment, it's not a punishment, it is our response to God's invitation. Baptism saves not as a removal of dirt from the body, but as an appeal to God for a good conscience through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Gone to heaven, right hand of God, angels, authorities, powers made subject. None of which really matters if baptism saves us. If our response to God's invitation saves us, right? And power is inverted from above. Since therefore Christ suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves with the same intention. For whoever suffers in the flesh, finished with sin, live the rest of your life in the flesh, no longer by human desires, but by the will of God. A mouthful, another good potential ending. But be clear, Peter is not, in what would be now his third attempt to confront this idea of suffering in the world, he's not saying, go figure out how to suffer. He's certainly not saying, whine and complain about how hard your life is as a Christian, which some Christians seem to think is our role today. He's saying, live by the will of God. Live in the way of God, not the wake of God. Live alongside culture. Live deliberately, intentionally alongside culture. Play by different rules than culture, and turn culture upside down. You hear the radical exhortation that has to be encoded, that can't just be sent out in the heart of the empire. It has to be embedded in what sounds safe and respectful of culture. Maybe you'll suffer as a result of this living alongside, turning upside. Jesus did. Peter will. Most of the disciples did, right? But your intent is a different way of living together. Choosing and manifesting different values, different priorities from those you live alongside. That's what you want. That's what makes your heart sing, your soul resonate. And if you don't, it's not that God's going to do anything to you, drown you, destroy you, damn you, condemn you. And you can choose obedience whenever you want. And obedience, beginning from the important from the very beginning of the letter, simply translates moving from God's wake to God's way. You've already spent enough time doing what Gentiles like to do, living in debauchery and passions and drunkenness and revels and carousing and lawless idolatry. This is the guy who was accused of being drunk at 10 in the morning, remember, in Jerusalem. He knows a little bit about it. And it's terribly amusing for the biblically literate, not just because Peter was accused of being drunk, but because the aforementioned Noah, the righteous, after being saved, caroused and drank and reveled to the point of passing out. The faith, you see, is not about mistakes you make and a God ready to damn you for them. It's about living with God as your fundamental orientation that saves you. They're surprised you no longer join them in the same excesses of dissipation, and so they blaspheme. But they will have to give an accounting to him who stands ready to judge the living and the dead. You see, that's really not as scary as it sounds if you've bought into this inversion, because judgment was inverted in the distorted retelling of the flood story. And what was put in its place? Forgiveness. Forgive even 70 times 7. Who did Jesus tell that to? Peter. God is forgiveness more than God is judgment. Faith is invitation more than it is commandment. More right side up emphases the church has too much inverted upside down. We've gotten all sidetracked into we know the right way for everyone to live, and it's our job to make sure they know what we know about them. more ways in which the church is radically affirming not God's power, but God's commitment to us and presence with us in the specific lives we lead. What if that were what people heard us saying? For this is the reason the gospel was proclaimed, even to the dead, so that though they had been judged in the flesh, as everyone is judged, they might live in the Spirit as God does. You see, if good news is proclaimed to the dead, the process, the trajectory of the good news is eternal, right? That's the metaphor. That's the good news never stops. And then hope can ever be the bigger story, even when things seem to be over, even when there seems to be no way through or forward. Even if you feel like you're lining up against the power of empire, Caesar, even as you're running to the tomb where all your best dreams lie shrouded in death. We, in the church tradition, have turned it into Jesus reverses death, which is an imperial way of thinking about it, if you stop to think about it. Power from on high controls your life and your afterlife, as it turns out. Right? Who's got the power? And God's doing this, and God will take care of it all. That's the comfort that authoritarianism relies on. Look, it's not up to you. You don't need to worry about this. We will take care of everything. Peter, who knew Jesus, instead emphasizes anti-imperially that Jesus teaches us to reverse the way of death and live the way of life that makes it here on earth as it is in heaven, which places Jesus and Peter both solidly in the tradition in which they were raised that sets before us every day life and death and hopes we choose life. That goes back to Moses. That's the prayer, right, after all. On earth as it is in heaven. Not in heaven finally having escaped earth. So in the midst of the lies, in the midst of corruption, evil, those who malign, in the midst of feeling overwhelmed and powerless, we are making heaven on earth. In the steadfast living of our lives in the way of God, intentionally living alongside culture, intentionally assessing our culture's values and priorities and turning them upside down from the way of death into the way of life, leaving imperial ways in our wake. What a word for us today. May we make it so.